friendship and camaraderie, and that's kind of cool to come here and see that. So thanks for letting me share a few minutes with you. I'm going to talk a little bit about the book, which is what Daniela asked us to talk about, but not a lot. I want to talk about a few other things first, or in conjunction with that. And bring it back to the election here and why this election is so important. Because it is just so important. But I think a lot of us look around and feel like things are kind of up in the air. You get that sense that there's a real moment of just expectation that, this is such an important time in our nation's history. And it's a little scary for us. And I had an experience a while ago that is a pretty good illustration of how I think a lot of you are feeling. Before I tell you that, I got to go back even further to when I was flying jets in the Air Force. I was stationed at Dyess Air Force Base in Texas. I don't know if any of you have ever been there. It's a real garden spot. I had a friend there named Vern. Vern was a great guy. He was a good friend, had a cute family. Everyone liked Vern. The only problem with him was he was absolutely 100%, no doubt about it, cursed. And pilots are real suspicious guys. I don't know if you know that. Most of them go through this kind of ritual before they fly. And Vern, every time I flew with him, it was like a religious experience because something always went wrong. For example, there's in the B-1 I flew, the airplane I flew, there's only been 2 times when the engines have started on fire. And both times were with Vern on board. There's only been 1 time the wings would sweep, they'd go aft. As you went really fast, you go fast and down low, the wings sweep aft. It allows you to go very fast. There's only been 1 time on the B-1 that the wings wouldn't come forward. And guess who was on board? Vern. Yeah, and it's actually, I got to tell a story real quick because they were flying low level route in England and flying at night, and they came out of low level, which is flying at 0.93 Mach at 200 feet off the ground in the dark. It's really pretty cool. They came up to altitude and they went to bring their wings forward and they wouldn't come forward, which means they can't slow down. So they did everything they could, couldn't bring them forward. They sent them to the longest runway in Europe, which is at Ramstein. It's like a 12,000, 13,000 foot runway. And I was an instructor pilot back at Dyess, and they got us, it was early morning in Europe then, it was just getting night here. They said, go to the simulator and put in all of these conditions. So we put in, the aircraft weight and the temperature and the pressure altitude. You can put in Ramstein. It's pretty cool. The simulator is just like flying a jet. And they said, practice landing and see if you can stop. And so we did it. Did it 5 times. We stopped 3 of them. And the other 2 times we ran off the end of the runway and went through some hangars at the end of the runway. And so they call us and say, well, can we stop? Are we going to make it? And we said, well, we think you can. I'm really glad that we're not doing it. And they went and landed at Ramstein. They touched down at 348 miles an hour. If you can imagine, wow. About a 290,000 pound jet touching down at, really fast. Blew the tires off just immediately, and then blew the brakes and metal on metal, and they straight to an end at the end of the runway. They did stop in time. Well, that's what it was like flying with Vern. There's other stories I can tell you. I don't have any time. It got so bad that someone in the squadron got some African prayer beads. Now, I didn't know there was even such a thing as African prayer beads. So we started passing them around. And, you talk to someone in the squadron and be like, hey, dude, how's it going? I said, oh, not good. Well, what's the matter? I'm flying with Vern tonight. You got an African prayer bead? Yeah, I got them right here. Okay, so I got transferred, lost touch with Vern. He went on with his illustrious Air Force career. Some time ago, it was almost 2 years ago now, I was flying on business back to D.C. Sat down in the airplane, I won't tell you what airline. We didn't push back from the gate, waiting on maintenance. I could actually hear him banging on something below us with a hammer, which makes me kind of nervous because as a pilot, there aren't that many things you can fix on the airplane with a hammer. They bang and bang and bang, and eventually they say it's fixed. We push back, we take off we go out east and we hit a line of thunderstorms. And we used to do what they call holding. You all have heard of holding, where you basically sit in circles. You used to have to do it pretty frequently. You hardly ever do it anymore because they're just much better at sequencing in with the weather radar. But we had to hold, and it's bumpy. There's lightning. We're in this constant turn, and what happens with people? Start getting sick. I was sitting on the aisle. I was watching this woman on the aisle, one row ahead of me, and she starts getting purple. She starts looking for the throw-up bag, and she couldn't find it, and so everyone's looking for the throw-up bag and handing them to her. And this poor woman started throwing up, and she like threw up her breakfast, and then like her dinner from the night before, and then some candy bar from the 7th grade. So she and now it smells bad, right? And she's holding this bag, and it's sloshing around, and now other people are getting sick. And we finally go into land, and we land at Reagan, and Reagan's a hard airport to land at. It's really short. It's right downtown. Most of you have been there, I'm guessing. I mean, your airtime literally seconds from the White House, from the Pentagon, from the Capitol building. Very, very strict procedures to land at Reagan. And it makes it hard on the pilot. But this poor pilot banged this thing down. And we bounced it a couple times and kind of rattled to a stop. And we're all really glad to be down at this point. So I stand up, I get my bags, I'm walking up the aisle, the pilot steps out of the cockpit, and I go, "Burn!" Bars! It makes perfect sense. Burn, we're getting the band back together. So, and actually the story goes on. I won't take the time to tell you, but it gets actually interesting from here. But, Vern and I stepped to the side, and we talked about our families and different things, and it was nice to catch up. Okay, well, you say that's a funny story, maybe, but why do you mention it? Well, all of us feel like we're sitting on the aircraft with who? With Vern. Yeah, we keep looking at the pilot in the cockpit and going, crap, Vern's up there again. Or crap, Obama's up there. You feel like everything's gone wrong, and yet you feel like it's over? No.
What's he doing with that hammer?
No. I mean, that's the problem, is we don't feel like it's over yet. We feel like we've still got some more bad stuff coming, and isn't that true? Don't we feel like there's still more coming?
I'm sure of it.
Yeah, many of us are. And I use that as a long introduction, but I said we wanted to kind of keep this one not real serious. But for heaven's sakes, we've got lots of problems that we're dealing with right now. What's the big one for most of us? The economy. It's huge for most of us. But that's not the only problem we have right now, and if we haven't been reminded over the last 2 weeks, but what other issue is important?
National security.
National security. Look what happened in Benghazi, and if we have some time to talk about that, I'd like to.
Okay.
Well, what happened in Benghazi was flat out traitorous. If you really understand the story here. There's other things. There's crumbling economies around the world. It's not just ours. There's a long list of things that bother us. But I want to come back now to maybe the theme of one of our books, or one of the books that I wrote. 7 Miracles That Saved America. I like the title. It's okay. I think the subtitle is more important. Subtitle is Why They Matter and Why We Should Have Hope. Because if you believe in American history, and if you believe these really were miracles, and by the way, that's not an LDS, that's not a Christian, that's not just a Christian thought, that is almost universal to our nation. If you believe that God is interested in what happens to this nation, then you have to ask yourself that question, do they matter? And why should we have hope? Because we should. In the following book to that, which is called The Miracle of Freedom, we talk about something which I think is worth mentioning, and that is this. Interesting question. How many people would you guess have lived on the earth through its entire history? From the beginning of man, demographers have actually gone and studied this. They've come up with their best guess. Any guesses on how many people have lived on the earth? 20 billion? 20 billion? Okay. It's low. 60? Still low. About 110 to 120 billion people, if they can estimate that. And I guess that they probably can. 110 billion people have lived on the earth as far as we know. Of those, maybe 5 billion of them have lived under any conditions that we would consider free. And here's an amazing thing to follow up on that. Of that 5 billion who have lived under what we would say is freedom, 3.5 billion of them are alive today. And if you talk about the miracle of freedom, I think that is such a great way to illustrate it. A tiny percentage of people who have ever lived in this earth have lived under anything that we would consider free. Most of us look around at the world today and we say, well, most people live like this. Maybe not everyone, but we have a tendency to think most people live this way. And the truth is that a tiny percentage of people did, and most of them are alive today. Another interesting reality. There's only 22 nations in the history of our world that we know of, 22 nations that have lived under freedom for more than 50 years. And that helps you understand what a miracle this nation is. When you look at us and the founding of our nation some 230-something years ago, and the light that we have become to the rest of the world. Let me share maybe one more thought with you, then we'll open up to your comments and your questions, and we'll be finished by 8. You can get up there by halftime. If I were to ask you, and this isn't I'm not looking for a right or wrong, I'm just your opinion. If I were to ask you, what is the foundational thought, the foundational phrase or word or idea that our nation is built upon, what would you say it is? Don't cheat. Okay, because you were there, right? Okay. Can I share this with them? The foundational idea, what would you think it'd be? Yes?
Enlightened self-interest.
Okay, enlightened self-interest, good. I'll give you a hint of something where kind of lines I'm thinking. A lot of people say...
I'm thinking freedom.
Freedom, good. A lot of people say, we, the people, as one of our, probably the newest citizen, U.S. citizen that we have, this is something I think you'll appreciate maybe more than the rest of us. We the people. Any other ideas of your own? Yes?
The natural rights of man.
The natural rights of man, we're going to come back to that.
By the people, for the people.
By the people, for the people, I love that one. Let me tell you what I think it is. Just my opinion. What did I say this afternoon? Do you remember?
Oh, I wasn't there.
You weren't there?
No.
I'm sorry. Good.
It's like, wait a minute.
Okay. I thought you were there, sorry. I think most people think of we the people when I've asked that to groups, but I think it would be this. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain and inalienable rights. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And then there's a couple phrases in there that ends by, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. You know, most of us honor and revere the Constitution, but the Constitution is not, in reality, our founding document. What is? The Declaration of Independence. It's the Declaration that said, this is what we believe. And let's talk about some of these keywords. We hold these truths. They didn't say this is our opinion.
Right.
They didn't say we've poll tested this and this is an idea we could kick around for a while. We hold these truths to be self-evident. This is so obvious you can't argue with it. That men are given their inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness by who? By God. Whatever you conceive Him to be, they are given those rights by their Creator. And they said, we, the people, get our rights from God. And then they went about their business and they realized 10 or 12 years later it wasn't enough. And the colonies were fracturing and slipping apart, and they realized we had to get together and form a government that could protect these rights. And they were going to give the government some limited power in order that the government could protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Most of us believed that. Now, there was something said during the Democratic Convention that turns that on its head. And I know what I'm about to tell you, all you're going to say, yeah, that's true, I heard that. What did they say in a video?
that government is the thing that we all
We
belong to.
all belong to. Government is the only thing that we all belong to, and that is exactly backwards. We don't belong to the government. The government belongs to us. They got it completely turned around. It is absolutely on its head. The government belongs to us. Our rights were given to us by God, and we gave some of those rights to the government. We don't belong to the government. But you know where that philosophy leads? And I'll conclude with this, because this is worth thinking about for a minute. Where does that philosophy lead us? Let me give you a couple illustrations. Now, Europe's a little bit ahead of us, but not far, and this will inevitably lead there if we don't recognize it. Europe's highest court, the equivalent of their Supreme Court, this last summer found, and some of you may have read this, because it was in an LDS Church magazine, they mentioned this, they found that they would not place foster children where? In any Christian homes. Because they would be, the word they used was, what's that?
Indoctrinated.
They would be infected with Christian philosophy. Infected with Christian philosophy.
Wait.
The British Supreme Court, the British Supreme Court, not our High Court, the British High Court, this last summer.
Yeah, but don't they also allow Sharia?
Yeah, they may.
They do.
They do, yeah.
That's insane.
Look, a lot of us hear that and we just think that's just insane. How could they have found that? But look where we're headed. What's one of the moral issues that's emerged with Obamacare, and there will be others, and Catholic institutions? That's right. For the first time, every other time, the courts have allowed exceptions for religious thought. But they have said, no, we're going to overrule that. And even though Catholic charities and Catholic institutions find it morally objectionable, it is against their religious philosophy. They are forcing them to provide contraceptive services in their medical policies. Last example of that, and then I'll happily take your questions or comments if you have any. Where does this ultimately lead from an economic point of view? And stay with me on this, if you will, because I really think this is true, but it takes me a while to illustrate it. A lot of times we say, hey, we're going to become like Europe. And I wish people wouldn't say that, because most of us have been to Europe and go, Europe's not that bad. You know, I've spent 10 glorious days in France. I'd go back there again, right? But that's not the real Europe. I'm interested, how many of you guys have lived in Europe? Actually lived there. Okay, is Europe that you visit in 10 days the Europe that you live in? It's different, isn't it?
You've never been to Europe?
I was born in Copenhagen.
Yeah. And I wish they'd quit saying Europe. You know what I wish they'd say? We're going to become like Greece. Because Greece is the illustration of where we're headed, not France. Now, France will be there eventually, but it's Greece. And look, Greece is bankrupt by every definition. By any analysis, Greece is bankrupt and has been bankrupt for a little more than 3 years. All they do is run to someone else and back to the EU saying, we need another $15 billion. We need another $11 billion. We need another $13 billion. Begging for that next tranche of payments. And they say, we're going to implement these reforms. And the reforms are such horrible things as you can't retire at 48. Maybe you're going to have to work until your 50s. That's horrible, isn't it? And different things like that. And what do the people there do? They riot and they go burn things. And they go strike. And as you watch this last summer, and the press didn't report it much, but as you watch it this last summer, I look at this and I honestly think, what are the people thinking? I'm trying to put my arms around, what are the people thinking? And I can't quite understand how they can turn their back on this reality that their nation is bankrupt and they have no choice any longer. And then it occurred to me, thinking about this relationship between government and their citizens. If you are a parent and you have children and you fall upon hard times, do you put your children out on the street? Of course not. Would society allow you to put your children out on the street? Of course not. Because they're your children. And you have a moral and a legal obligation to take care of them, even if you are bankrupt. You still have to find a way to take care of your kids. And that is exactly the philosophy and the idea that the people of Greece have. We are your children. We belong to you. You have to take care of us. You can't sever that bond. Even though you're bankrupt, you can't sever that responsibility. And that ultimately is where this idea leads. If you really believe that we belong to the government, instead of God giving us these rights, that is inevitably where we will be. This election is so important. We will define who we are for generations based on what we do right now. Many of us are much more encouraged after last night. But this battle isn't over, for heaven's sakes. We're a long way from being over. But we have to keep in the fight. So go down to Romney Center and make some calls. Put some yard signs in your front yard. Do what Dan does and say, you know what, I can be a good legislature. I'm going to run. Even though I'm a Republican in a heavily Democratic district, true. I'm going to run and I'm going to win and I'm going to make some changes. Be members of the young Republicans, even if you're 70 or whatever some of us.
Dangerous route.
Whatever you can do,
Scale it back.
do it.
50 is safer. 50 is safer.
Let's keep fighting on this thing, because we have to keep in the fight, because it's going to be a fight maybe for the rest of our lives, but we can win this fight. So thank you all for giving me a chance to be here. God bless you for being here. God bless America. We need His blessings in this time. And thank you. Good night.